Hello, everybody. Chris with Platinum Distributing again. With me right now is Stu Smith of Smith Madrone. Thanks for taking a few minutes with us, Stu. Smith Madrone, so give us a little bit of your history.
Well, it goes back to the 60s when I was at UC Berkeley, and there was a revolution going on, but it was also that and a food and wine revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And roast beef in this country wasn't done unless it was gray. Vegetables weren't cooked unless they were limp. And exotic cheeses was a Monterey Jack, a sharp cheddar, or a Velveeta. And all of that started to change in the mid-late 60s in the San Francisco Bay Area, New York. And I was loving wine more and more and more. And I had some friends who came from the Napa Valley, and I got to know the Napa Valley, and didn't want to go back to Los Angeles area, which is where I grew up, and decided to take a class out at UC Davis, I guess probably 69, which was a introductory class in viticulture and enology. Loved it, decided I want to go there, and had to go back and then start taking real science.
Mm-hmm.
Like Chem A, 1B, 1C, with all the pre-med majors.
Sure.
As a senior, they were all, freshmen. And got admitted to UC Davis, where I had to do all of the hard sciences, like chemistry, inorganic chemistry, bacteriology, plant pathology, all that kind of good stuff. And then started a little partnership of family and friends because I didn't know better. And people of middle class, if you had a dream, you could kind of pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
Napa Valley was, pre-wine, pre-Napa Valley, pre-St. Helena, pre-oil embargo, pre-inflation, pre-everything. And my brother and I, planted the vineyard ourselves. It was a forest. It had been a forest in the, it had been vineyards in the 1880s. With phylloxera at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, most of the vineyards on Spring Mountain were abandoned. When we got it in early spring of 71, we got a logging permit. We had to, take out 2.5 feet diameter trees, and alongside the tree was a little redwood grapestake pooched out at a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't clear the forest, but we had the forest logged, cleared. We ended up picking up all the rocks and roots and all the leftover and planted the vineyard, the nucleus of it in 1972. Built the winery, my brother and I, by our own little hands. 1974, and we've more or less been making wine ever since.
Fantastic.
We started out with two whites and two reds. We started out with Johannesburg Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon. Being good arrogant Americans, we thought we could do everything well. We made one really, really good vintage of Pinot Noir, and we made a whole lot of ordinary vintages of Pinot Noir and gave it up. Best thing we ever did. Too much mediocre Pinot Noir in the world, and as I like to say, that we make every bit as bad a Pinot Noir as the French do. They got nothing on us there. And then in the end of the 90s, we added Merlot and Cabernet Franc. And then in 2007, we added what we call our Cook's Flat Reserve.
Okay.
And we do not buy grapes. If we don't grow them, we don't make them. And our overarching philosophy is to get the vintage into the glass of wine. We think that's important. We think that's why we vintage date, which is to celebrate the diversity of the vintages and not make them kind of, as the cliche is, pounding the square peg through the round hole, taking off those interesting edges and corners just for uniformity. Now, obviously, we think wine should be hedonistic. It's the first obligation, which is to give pleasure. Then balance, complexity, varietal character. And then there's this big talk about terroir. California, a lot of us use the term a sense of place. I change it a little bit. I call it an ephemeral sense of art that wine should have, or that premium, ultra premium, whatever the category is that we're going to be in. And that is that wine should be unique. If we make wine just like our neighbors, be it Pride or Keenan, or Robert Mondavi, or Louis Martini, or whomever, then we're failing. Because why should they buy our wine if our wine's just like everybody else's? Mm-hmm. So I think wine should be unique. It should, and it should have some artistry to it. But it should be all those other things too. And wine, I think, is the most wonderful beverage on the face of the earth.
I agree.
It just doesn't get any better.
So, talking about that art and that style, your premium Chardonnay drinkers, when they see Smith Madrone on a restaurant list or in a fine wine shop around the country, what are they going to get out of your Chardonnay?
Well, let me kind of back up, and it's something I've learned at public tours over the years. When people would say, I don't like Chardonnay, I'm just a red wine drinker,
right.
or red wine drinker. I say, no, you're gonna get the red. The red, you gotta have the white.
You gotta try the white.
And they go, oh, we really like that. And so I've learned over time that we make red wine. We make Chardonnay for red wine drinkers. Now I'm not sure what that means, but every time somebody says they don't like Chardonnay, they like our Chardonnay. And I think it gets back to that concept that I just mentioned. There's a lot of lovely, wonderful, plain, innocuously boring Chardonnay out there. And we don't want anything to do with it. We made that with Pinot Noir. We're not interested in making that with Chardonnay. Our Chardonnays are full, rich, they have lots of flavor, but we will not give up good acidity on any of our wines. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely crucial to the Smith Madrone line. California is in this grand struggle over which camp is going to win. Will it be the big, overblown, California-esque 15, 16 plus alcohol style with, as my son calls, a 4x4. It has a pH. These wines have a pH generally approaching 4 or over 4, and a TA which is approaching 0.4. Mm-hmm. And personally, I hate them. They're very dull. I can smell them, mm-hmm. And they're just not bright. And food and wine really go together. I know that there are a number of people who think that when you say a food wine, that it's a cop-out, that it doesn't have intensity, and I disagree with that. I think wines that respect the European heritage of balance and complexity and elegance and finesse, but with the intensity that California can give the wines, is the best of both worlds. And we don't have to be a show-off with, standing on top of the hill, beating our chest going, this is the greatest vintage, and it's the highest alcohol, and it's the highest extract, and it's like, sorry, dude, it's not very interesting. So with Chardonnay, it's not, the wines are not going to be long-lived. Almost no California Chardonnays are really long-lived. I mean, the Chardonnay will live a long time, but it won't improve.
Okay.
You don't get the return for your investment like you do with Cabernet or the Reserve or Riesling, especially.
Sure.
It's a really fun drinking wine. I think it goes with everything. I probably drink of our wines more of the Chardonnay than any other of our varietals.
We tasted through the wines yesterday, including the Cook's Flat, and the Chardonnay, like he says, it's delicious. It's definitely unique, and with what you said with the acidity, even though it's big and flavorful, it's kind of oddly refreshing. It's just very inviting to the next taste. So, should we move on to the Cabernet?
Let me back up and for the folks watching and say, look, we barrel ferment, we harvest it, reasonably ripe, 24 degrees bricks. We barrel ferment in all brand new French oak barrels from the Center Forest of France, which is Trancé, Allier, and Nevers, medium toast levels. We stir for the first 3-4 months, then we let everything die down, settle down, I should say. And we inoculate with ML. If it goes, it goes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We don't care. We haven't run an analysis on ML in probably 25 years. Now, going on to the Cabernet. This happens to be the 2010 Cabernet Sauvignon. It is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon. It is 6% Cabernet Franc and 9% Merlot. Okay. We use an aggregate, as I say, of new and older French oak barrels. The wines are unfined and unfiltered. And we're really trying to get the same thing in the wines as we are with the Chardonnay, which is complexity and balance and elegance. The alcohols are approaching 14. Sometimes we're a little over, sometimes we're a little under. This happens to be 14.1. The Chardonnay is almost always over 14. This is 14.4.
Okay.
And the wines, this particular vintage is good acidity, bright acidity, has very lovely, dark, complex flavors and aromas. And it's a wine that gives pleasure and enjoyment and is going to have a certain amount of ageability to it.
Sure. When do you feel that you're going to start hitting the sweet spot for a vintage like the 2010?
Probably the very nice sweet spot, probably another couple, 2-3 years. The wines will age. We just opened at the winery 4 days ago, before I got here. We opened up a number of 1980 vintages. The 82 was extremely youthful. Mm-hmm. All of the wines, we opened 6 wines, 82, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, I think. And all had bright red colors to them. None of them had any of that brick brown or brownish color to them. The 84 was spectacular.
Wow.
And if anybody said that this was a 30-year-old wine, we would all go, no, not possible. So our wines do age and pay back dividends. So I would say the first sweet spot that this wine's going to hit is a couple years from now. Just as we're probably, it's going to disappear from the marketplace.
Sure.
But that's life.
Sure.
Cabernet is Cabernet, and we again like elegance. We do not like over-the-top stuff, which I've mentioned before, and we're very happy with it, and the marketplace seems to be happy with it, and so we're happy.
Yeah. As winemakers and doing this for so long, how exciting or how fulfilling is it for you guys to get together and open up some of those old vintages and have that kind of surprise?
It's a lot of fun. We have a wine library, which is underneath the main floor of the winery. And it was originally going to be a little, like 6 by 10 room. And the rest of the cellar was going to be barrels. And, we had like 50 barrels down there. And it didn't take long before we had to kick the barrels out for all the wine library wine. And we keep a little bit of everything we've ever made. Unfortunately, as things go, we have way more than we would like of the not so good vintages and not nearly enough of the really good vintages. But we keep them back because we want to be able to give the consumer our real best guesstimate of what the wines are going to be like in the future, how they're going to age or not age. And we can only do that if we keep something back from every vintage. Now, we only have a couple bottles of each vintage that go back into the early 70s, mid-70s, but we still have 1 or 2 bottles. And surprisingly for everyone, a lot of times when you get some ullage on a bottle, maybe down an inch, it's not necessarily going to be a bad wine. The aging of wine is still a mystery.
Sure.
I don't know much about it. I know probably more than most people, which is still not very much. I was down in the wine cellar about 3-4 months ago, and there were little half bottles laying there. They were Robert Mondavi Fumé Blanc half bottles. And I had my flashlight down there, and I'm going, gee, that looks like a pretty good color. So I took it upstairs. And I've forgotten exactly what it was, but it was over 30 years. It was probably 35 to maybe even 40 years.
Wow.
Took it upstairs, and we do at the winery a lot, blind.
Sure.
You know, we call them misto wines. So, you know, I handed out the misto wine, and everybody got that it was a Sauvignon Blanc based Fumé Blanc style wine. That was clear. And most people thought it was about 4 or 5 years old. When I took it back, I mean, when I showed everybody, everybody was incredulous. We actually then went down and found a 750 of the same wine, and it was terrible. I mean, it was what you would expect of a Sauvignon Blanc that was 35 plus years old. Went back and grabbed another half bottle, and it wasn't very good. So the real question is, I mean, I don't know the answer, is what made that one bottle laying there? And when we got them, we took them downstairs. They've been aged, you know, in a cellar underground. All those years. So, just as an aside, something made that one bottle hold up really, really, really well.
It knew. It had to be good to get you to open those other bottles.
But then the issue is, you know, bottle variation. The old adage: there are no great vintages, there are only great bottles.
Yeah.
All very, very. Very interesting, and it's one of the things that keeps you fresh in the wine business, because there's never a time when you know everything, and if you do think you know everything, you really don't. Anyhow, that's an aside.
Cool. So the Riesling. Let's talk about the Riesling. Are people in general missing the boat on Rieslings?
Not the people who drink our wines and follow us. They're right where they ought to be. Riesling, it's been a frankly a lifetime struggle to get people to acknowledge Riesling, what it can be. What happened was a very good friend of mine, who was the winemaker at Freemark Abbey in 73 or 4, I can't remember which vintage it was. I think it was 74, which we had the rain. Could have been 73, but I think it was 74. One of the owners brought in some Riesling that was moldy and high in sugar, and Christian Brothers rejected the wine, the grapes, several gondolas full, and he said, "Look, I'm a part owner of Freemark Abbey. They got to take it.
Sure.
In other words, I'm going to take my own grapes." Jerry saw the grapes and said, "I think I can do something with this," and made a dessert wine, we called it Edelwein. Won the sweepstakes award at the LA County Fair, which was the biggest deal in California at the time. And like the idiots that we California vintners are, everybody started making Riesling and wanted to emulate what Jerry did, and destroyed the varietal by making it sickeningly sweet, no balance between acidity and sugar. And we lost 2 generations of wine drinkers who would say, Riesling, I don't like it, it's too sweet. What's happened is that we've gotten rid of those people, we've jettisoned them over the side. We now are down to a small cadre of people who are really dedicated to the variety. I think there's a lot of really good Rieslings being made around the country. Our style happens to be what I would call a dry style. There is no term, it's a unregulated term.
Okay.
This particular vintage is about 0.35%. So that's pretty doggone dry, and it's really below most people's threshold for sugar. We, as a general range, shoot for the 0.6 to 0.7, 0.75 range. The 2013 that we just bottled Monday before I came to Omaha, is about 0.9, but it's a lovely, beautiful vintage. And so we kind of kick around in that area. I wanted to get my brother was gone that week, and I was, in charge of getting it to finish, and it just wouldn't finish. I swore at it, I kicked it, I abused it, I said horrible things at it, I did everything I could. You know,
Might have made it
warmed up.
worse. Yeah.
Might have made it worse. It took umbrage, and finally it won out, saying, "Look, this is where we're going.
All right.
We're not going any farther." And it really brought me back to the point that it's what the vintage wanted, and we're not going to. You know, we tried to force it a little bit, and it wouldn't, and so we just said, okay. I mean, there were more upstream, extreme things that we could have done, and we said, no, we're not going to do that.
So for people that maybe don't understand a dry style Riesling or aren't buying dry style Rieslings, what are a couple other wines they might be fans of and not realize that a dry style Riesling might be up their alley?
Well, if they drink wine at all, then Riesling, a dry style Riesling's up their alley. It is one of the great four wines. It's one of the great four wines of the world. It's not one of the great white wines of the world. It's one of the great wines of the world. You know, really, in my kind of humble point of view, or unhumble, you know, it's Chardonnay, Cabernet, Pinot Noir, and Riesling. Those are the four greatest varietals in the world at the moment. Maybe something will come up in the future. And Riesling is fresh, it's fruity, it's fun. It's kind of like an alfresco picnic. It doesn't take itself horribly seriously, and yet it's really, really good. And it ages in a way that almost I don't think any other wine does. We opened a bottle of 85 Riesling a couple months ago. So that's 29 years old. Spectacular wine. Just spectacular. Still had good color. The aroma of generally fresh peaches, pears, lychee had evolved into this kind of honey-like fusel oil aroma, and like a great Burgundy or a great claret wine, you just roll the glass, and you almost don't want to taste it because it smells so good.
Sure.
It pays back enormous dividends for cellar aging, and yet it's still a great wine for everyday consuming. It's dry enough to go with almost anything.
Sure.
I mean, I don't drink it with ribeyes, but other than that, any of the light meats. It does go well with game, elk, boar, any of the freshwater fishes, even the saltwater fishes. It goes. I generally drink Chardonnay with saltwater fishes, but with freshwater fish, it's always Riesling.
Nice.
The other one thing too is that Riesling in restaurants is always the best, to do during the the fall holidays, Thanksgiving, Easter's, spring Easter's, because we get a lot of, for lack of a better word, kind of amateurs coming out, and Riesling and Pinot Noir, is good for, as I like to say, Aunt Jean, Uncle Bob, and Sydney the wine snob. They can all enjoy the dry style Riesling and the Pinot Noir.
Sure.
And then they can all argue about family issues, and enjoy the wine as they're doing it. But Riesling is just a fabulous wine. And we're really seeing a great deal of interest, especially in the sommelier young people world of the deal. And that's why I say we've lost 2 generations of consumers. Now, Riesling I don't think is ever going to catch up to Chardonnay.
Right.
But it is going to re-exert itself into a very important position, and it allows people to come in and have something which is not so dry or austere as some of the other wines.
Sure. Real quickly, do you want to talk about your Cook's Flat?
Oh, sure. Love it. For, 20 plus years, we'd always been thinking about doing a reserve wine. And the 2000 vintage came around, and we said, yep, this is the year to do it. And we called it Cook's Flat because George Cook was the first owner of the property. He homesteaded it in the early 80s, late 70s, 1870s. Got title to it via what's called a United States Land Office patent, because he didn't prove the property to the point that the government said, yeah, we'll give you the title to it. And we have that document, and we blew that document up, and that is the tissue wrap for the wine.
Very cool.
And it comes in 3-pack wooden boxes and 6-pack wooden boxes. The idea was that we think we are good, arrogant California Napa Valley winemakers, think we can do the best of anybody. And so our goal was to give to make a reserve wine, an expensive wine, that really, again, I'm repeating myself from earlier, respects the hallmarks of European winemaking, but with real California intensity of flavor and fruit. And that's what we think we've done with the Cook's Flat Reserve. And our goal, and then somebody says, well, what's your aim? What are you trying to do? And our aim is to make the very best. Mm-hmm. We are going after the very best, most expensive California wines and European wines. Mm-hmm. As I like to say, Chateau Lafite, Mouton, Margaux, Brion, they've got a couple hundred years, maybe a little more head start on us, but we're catching them. And that's the goal, and what we're trying to make is a wine which truly is an expression of the vintage, of us, is unique, has that intensity of fruit, but it has that balance and is approachable drinking. We're making very small quantities, 160, 200 cases max, mm-hmm. Depending on the vintage. We're only putting it out in the very best periods, the very best years. Each bottle is numbered. And the reason it's called Cook's Flat is because there was a piece of ground, it's an 8-acre block for us, a vineyard. And it has always been referred to as Cook's Flat. Now, folks down in the valley floor would scoff at the fact that this thing is flat. But mm-hmm. for us on the mountains, it's pretty doggone flat. And so hence that, and the Cabernet and most of the Merlot come from that. The 2010, which is the current vintage, is mm-hmm. 75% Cabernet Sauvignon, 25% Cabernet Franc. Mm. The previous vintages have a little bit of Merlot in it. My brother and I decide what we want to do, and if the Merlot goes, or the what have you, we're there to make the very best wine from that vintage. And we are extremely pleased with it. It's getting good reception. And it's a really, really fun wine to have.
Very cool. So when is the last time that you've tried the 2000?
2000.
You mentioned the first vintage.
2007.
2007 was the first vintage.
2007. Okay. Yeah, and it's developing and evolving just like it should. And a lot of people will say, well, gee, it's kind of like a Bordeaux, isn't it? And I go, well, yeah, which is kind of our intent.
Right.
But then they go, yeah, but it's, and they go, yeah, it really is a marriage, I think, of that traditional value with and respect for those European values, but with California fruit.
Very good. Well, Stu, thanks so much for coming in and giving us a good baseline about your wines and your winery. And next time we do one of these videos, it's going to be in Napa for sure.
I like that.
I'm looking for a little better backdrop, so we'll have some wine open and
we'll have the entire Napa Valley fall down behind us.
That will be beautiful. Well, Stu, thanks a lot. You can find, I'll post more information about the website where you can find Smith Madrone and look for it at fine restaurants in Nebraska. Yeah, thanks, Stu.
My pleasure. Lots of